Okay. Welcome, everybody. Let's sing a little song. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds a future, and life is worth the living just because he lives. When's the last time you saw God move? You know, you saw a movement of God. I heard a testimony last week of a man who was part of the hurricane that just recently hit Florida. And he lived in Fort Myers, lost everything, lost his house, lost all of his tools, lost his livelihood. He was a construction worker, lost his livelihood, lost his car. And I was having a conversation with him. I said, how are you getting through this? Like, what was the turning point? Because he seemed to have joy in his life. And he said, it all changed for me when I saw the beauty of God on the beach that was just in rubble. But he said it was on that beach and in that scene of you know, where the sand had kind of come up and made a new berm that people were still loving. And he said it was there that I saw the goodness of God with my eyes that night. And he said, I began to believe and have hope again. So tonight we're going to be talking about our senses. And as sensates, we're going to talk about the spiritual pathway of a sensate, somebody who their spirituality and their spiritual temperament is very much informed by what they see, by what they hear, by what they smell, by what they touch, by what they feel. And so, I think to one degree or another, if you're a naturalist, some of us here are naturalists. If you're a naturalist, some of you probably have a kind of a tendency towards sensate as well, where we... to me, late August, usually I step out and I'll smell the first fall morning. You know what that smells like? The first fall morning where it's like, a little bit of death in the air. You know what I mean? Things are starting to give way a little bit. Fall is one of, if you just love fall and fall colors, you might be a naturalist, but you might also be a sensate. If you look at all of the different varying degrees of colors and the shades. I mean, this fall, I told my wife, I said, this maple here looks more like a grapefruit red. It just was different. It almost looked like a grapefruit. So we all have, again, these spiritual temperaments that we operate in, and we can operate in more than one. But tonight we're going to talk about sensates. And so to do that, we have our very own Terry Mullis with us. He's going to come. Terry, who here had Terry as an art teacher? Anybody here have Terry as an art teacher? One. Leslie is the only one.
One.
Just one.
He was there. I wasn't very good.
Okay. Phil wasn't good enough. Hey, we're going to pray for Terry, and we're going to let him share. So, God, we thank you for Terry tonight. We thank you, Lord, for the way that you've wired him, the way you've enabled him to see you and see others and see beauty in the world. And I just pray that as he communicates to us tonight, that we would, Lord, be able to learn more about this temperament and maybe discover more about ourselves and discover more about those next to us. And Lord, ultimately discover more about you. So we thank you for this time together. It's in your name we pray, Jesus. Amen. Thank you, Terry.
Okay. Where to start? I'll start out with the idea that church used to be really difficult for me. I mean, when I first, as a kid, you'd come in and not knowing what sensate was, not having any idea. We just kind of had the idea that everybody was the same. You came in, you behave just like the saint that sat down in the other aisle. And it was very difficult because that's not what it worked for me. I mean, I'd come in and I was looking around wondering, why did they do that? Who put that color up there? Things like this. And so church just wasn't the same thing for me. And it went that way for a long time. And I think not until I actually went to college and was sitting in art history classes did it start to come to me, just what I'd missed. Because, I mean, we have a rather nice church here. I mean, we've got nice windows that nobody knows what they mean, but that's okay. Hopefully we do now, but we had them, and we've had them here from about 1950. And until just recently, we had no idea what they were. And now it's available. Now there's history here. Now there's theology here, and we have a better idea of what those things mean. But once I got there and I started to see what was going on through Europe primarily, I mean, the church starts, Paul moves into Rome. They start to build the Catholic Church out of this, and you start to see these huge cathedrals getting built, which I think to us was a total waste of money. I mean, that's kind of how I was raised, the idea that you don't build nice things. You put your money off somewhere, but you don't build a nice church, which was kind of a hard thing to deal with because, I mean, how many of us have nice homes? How many of us go home thinking, this is a nice dump. I really like this dump that I live in now. I've gotten rid of all the nice things. I've given everything away. So I have this home that I hate to go to. And it's just not how we think. It's not how we behave. It's not how we are. I mean, some of us have great things. Some of us have nice things. Some of us are of this style. Some are of this different style. But we still like to live in a comfortable place that we find pleasing to live in. And I think the church should be the same. It should be a place that we enjoy coming to, a place that we find pleasure in visually, the sounds that we hear, all these things. I mean, here's an example, is like one of the senses is the sense of smell. And if you think about it, when was the last time you experienced it at our church? Yeah, if eating a meal. I'll give you another example, which a lot of people here know, Jeannie Mannion. It's not that she smelled like incense, but you knew what Jeannie smelled like, and you knew if you'd been hugged by Jeannie, and you probably knew all day long. But the thing about that was, she's a loving person. I mean, every week people came in and there's Jeannie with a big smile on her face. And after you had that hug, you remembered Jeannie all day long. But that was a sense of smell. And no, I'm not saying do that. Don't go out and get Avon, and everybody wear it. Just don't do that. But it's the idea of smell, the idea that there is one sense that when we stop and think about it, we have a lot of good memories about. When we deal with her, I mean, sound, basically we're dealing with speakers in our church and in most churches, but here's just going back to my school. I was fortunate to be able to go to Europe. Our daughter was over there, so we went over and visited her, and we were able to go to some churches. And one of the things we did, we went to Westminster Abbey. And we first walked in, and I think there was tours, and you had to pay money for it and everything like this. We thought, nah, let's come back later. There's an evensong service, which is a service of about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And the nice thing about it is you go through the church and you sit back in the back. Do most of you guys know how the churches in Europe are set up? It's basically a cross. You have a long nave like we have here, and then, if anybody's noticed, we've got these little transepts off either side of our church. Well, these are much bigger. And then you've got an area in behind that. Well, the area in behind that was where the choir would sit. That, if you go to an evensong service, that's where you go. You're not sitting out in front in this huge nave. You're sitting back in that choir area. And what's so wonderful about it is the idea that we're sitting there and there's a choir and they start to sing. There's no speakers. That sound starts rolling through that church. It's amazing. Because you're sitting there and it's just like it's coming down. Excuse me. It's really neat. It's just like it's coming down on top of you. I mean, it's almost like it's coming out of heaven. And so you're sitting there, you're hearing all this wonderful sound, no speakers. It's just the acoustics. These people were so concerned about having a proper sense of things that they acoustically built these churches to when somebody's sitting here singing, it just goes to the heavens and then drops down. It's wonderful stuff. And as you walk through the church, there's symbols everywhere. I mean, you've got saints, you've got stories everywhere. I mean, there's people sitting here, you see all this stuff, and like, I don't know, what's the first slide you got? Okay, that's Westminster. That's Westminster Abbey right there. Most of us will look at that and say, "My gosh, you wasted so much money. So much money is just gone to waste." I mean, how many people could we take care of building that thing? But on the other side, do we? Let's see. I don't know how to say this. I mean, there's an importance to this stuff in terms of how we view God, I guess. I mean, just like the first temple that Solomon built was not a lot bigger than this church. The sanctuary was really not much different than ours, except for the fact it's about 10 feet taller, and it's just a big rectangle. The walls were covered with gold. The floors were covered with gold. The altar was covered with gold. I mean, they looked on it as being a precious place, an important place, a holy place. And the way they dealt with it, the way they conveyed that was by basically covering everything with the most precious thing they had, which was gold. So when they build churches like this, there's that same idea, the idea of creating an awe for God, creating a preciousness for God. So when we were in that church, we were sitting where that big rose window is that you can see up there. We were down kind of in the middle of that where we were sitting. So we were there experiencing all this. I mean, it was everywhere. I mean, the visuals were everywhere. The music was rolling down all over the place. It was just the most awesome thing you've ever seen in your life or felt in your life. What's the next? Okay, that's an inside view. I'm not sure that's Westminster, but it's still the idea that when you look there, you can see the vaulted ceiling up above. That was designed to let that sound roll through that place. The windows. I mean, at that time, nobody had windows. If you went into a house, somebody's house, if they were super rich, yeah, they had windows, but most people just simply had shutters that they closed or curtains they would close. So can you imagine just living in these little hovels, in a sense, ceilings about this high, little bitty windows to keep the cold out, and then walking into this on a Sunday morning or a Saturday or whenever, and just suddenly being overwhelmed with all of the color and the visuals of images of Christ, images of all these stories from the Bible, just overwhelming you from those windows alone. I mean, it had to be it is an awe-inspiring thing. And now what's our next slide? Okay, so I showed you this big, huge, humongous church. It's a massive thing. This is a little church just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. It's a little Catholic church. And we had an opportunity to go there a few years. I didn't know about the place. It just happens, again, my daughter, she seems to get me all kinds of things, took us there. And it's a small church. It's probably half of this area here, a quarter of this area, very small. But to go in, I mean, they don't have the big stained glass windows. They don't have all that other stuff. But when you walk in, it's a church that's a very personal place. So this is the inside of that church. I mean, it's not a massive, huge thing, but their walls are lined with images of the stories from the Bible. And it's all done by local people. I mean, they carve it, they painted it, everything was done locally. It's by their artisans. And when you walk in, you're just in awe. I mean, this little place, and you're just in awe of it just because of all that these people put into it. It's such an important thing to them that they were willing to put that kind of time and that kind of effort into creating a place that they could worship. And you just sit there and you can just take it in and just enjoy it. So it's just kind of the opposite, but at the same time, it's a complete story in a sense. You know, everything in here was done by the local artisans. They didn't go out to Walmart or Costco or something and buy something. If they needed it, they made it themselves because that was important to them. It's theirs. So that's what they ended up with. And it's just as precious and just as awesome and just as holy as that big cathedral you just saw, but for different reasons. But it's all still that idea of color and texture and all these other things that goes into it, the consistency, the harmony. I mean, these are terms that an artist would use, you know, to convey what they're talking about, but that's all here. And that's what makes it something visually exciting to look at. What's our next one? Okay, now I'm just going to throw off. This is off to a sense of touch. This is in the Vatican. This is St. Peter. Okay? And now the next slide. That's his foot. This is a sense of touch. 400 years ago, that foot had toes and toenails and wrinkles and everything else. And so what's happened is the people have come in and just had to have that touch. They had to have something there to keep themselves connected. So they touched it. They touched it, their families touched it, their grandkids touched it, their great-grandkids touched it. And every touch took just another little bit of that bronze away. To today, we just have basically a slipper. The toes are gone. And when you think about it, I mean, here we don't have any statues that we're rubbing bare here, but think about the altar on a Sunday morning when somebody goes up front. The touch. The idea of putting your hands and, you know, with the idea of praying. This is stupid. I'm not usually this way. I don't know why I'm doing this. But, I mean, I guess it just kind of caught me. So, I mean, we do these things. I mean, sometimes we don't think about it. Sometimes we do. I mean, I'm sure there were people that touched it just because somebody else touched it. But still, it started somewhere. Somewhere, somebody found they needed that connection. They need that touch. And so it came from this. And, you know, it's in a lot of churches. We visited churches when we were over there that, so at Saint, they had basically somebody that was important to the church. And their face was gone. Over the years, over the centuries, people had walked by and put that hand on that saint or on that person. And just by that touch, a little bit was gone. Every next time, a little bit more was gone. And over time, that face disappeared. I mean, it's still there. They still tell you who it is, but their face is gone because of that need to touch. That sense, I mean, we hug and we think about it like that, but in the holy sense, this is another way that sense of touch comes into play. What's our next one? Okay, now we're going to get started. Okay, this is a painting by Peter Paul Rubens. Crucifixion. I know in our church, we tend not to use the crucifixion, we use just a plain cross. That's what I've been told. Don't understand why, but we do. And it's, as I understand, it's the idea that we have a risen Christ. He's no longer on the cross, it's over. But to me, that tends to take away because the story's kind of gone in a sense. We don't have that visual anymore in a way. This one is called, this is an example of a triumphal cross of Christ. The idea being that, if you look at him, he's still a very healthy person. This is a well-built guy. Look at his face. It's passive. There's no pain. There's nothing that shows us any kind of anguish on his face at all. And the idea of this kind of a crucifixion is that he is above that. We couldn't do anything to him. This is a Christ that went through all this, and yet sin did not touch him. That's what that crucifixion's about. And you'll see a lot of these where it's called the triumphal Christ because he was triumphant over sin, he was triumphant over hate, he was triumphant over all these things that we tried to cast onto him. And he was able to just bypass it all. And so we have that kind of an image. The next one, which he's not going to show yet, is another crucifixion. This one is from a sanitarium or hospital in Germany. And what it deals with is the idea, this is the place that people would get what they called St. Anthony's fire, which is basically a disease that they would get from fungus from rye grain. They would eat rye grain and then they would get a fungus from it and it would contaminate the body. And these people basically, for the most part, all died. Today, they give you some medicine for it, it's over. It's like a bad rash. But at that time, these people would break out in a rash, they'd break out in lesions, their joints would ache, they would eventually limbs would literally start falling off. And by the time they got to this hospital, they had literally days to weeks before they would die, and they died excruciating deaths. All these people could do, all the nuns could do for them was try and keep them happy. Well, not happy, but keep them, as pain-free as possible. That's all they could do. There was nothing else for them. So a guy named Grunwald, they asked him to come in and do an altarpiece for him. He did one to identify with those people. Look at the hands. We're not looking at a triumphant Christ any longer. This is somebody has seen as much pain as these people are going to see. This is a Christ who identifies, that understands what these people went through. And as the story goes, everybody that was brought in, as they would wheel them in, most of them were in some sort of a wagon or on a cart or something, they would stop and give them an opportunity to look at this and then explain to them, how Christ understood their pain, understood their hurt, understood their fear. And then, so that there would be some identity with it. So here we've seen a Christ that, is triumphant over everything. Here's another Christ image of, I understand your pain. No matter how bad your pain is, I understand it. So so that visually you can see how people start. We're communicating with people here, from their theology, triumphal Christ, to their personal pain here, their fear, all these things. They can see it here. They can understand that he knows what they're talking about. So what's our next one? Okay, it's another death of Christ. This is the Pietà. This is by Michelangelo. This is in the Vatican. And here we're seeing a mother. A mother with her dead son. It's still triumphal in a sense. You can see the kind of the peace on her face, the fact that she does not have the anguish. So we're still dealing with that triumphal idea here. But it's still just now we're seeing it from a different point of view. I mean, we're actually saying, how did his mother view this? How did she deal with the fact that she just lost her son? Now, the next one. This is a series of slides. This is from a church in Bologna, Italy. It deals with, again, this is the death of Christ. You see him here in the center, the characters around. You've got, I'm not going to get names here. We'll just deal with it when we get there. But this is another example, another time, another way of dealing with the death of Christ. So let's just start through. So this is Joseph of Arimathea. This is the guy who gave him he's the one who provided this tomb. And I mean, it's kind of we don't see the pain so much on his face, but I mean, he was basically, he was a big time guy here. And so I'm sure there's some anguish on it in terms of him dealing with what's going to happen to him after this is all dealt with and people start finding out what he's done. He wasn't supposed to do this. So, I mean, you can kind of see some of the fear on some of the anguish on his face, but let's look at the next person. This is John, because the thing's covered up. So, here you have, one of the disciples. And if you kind of look at it, I mean, you can kind of see the confusion. I mean, what's he dealing with? He had a Christ who wasn't supposed to die. He had a king that was supposed to basically throw the Romans out and create a new nation. And here he is dead. So where does he go? What's he do? And you can see that in his face. And then we start dealing with the women, his mother, Mary Magdalene, and then there's another Mary that in this one there's another Mary that's there with Christ's mother. So there's 3 Marys here. So let's go to the next one. Just think about it. You lose your kid runs out in the street, gets hit by a car. There it is. It's just overwhelming anguish. We see it not only in her face, but you look at the way they've taken her robe and everything, and the way the lines are twisting and everything, the idea of her rushing up to deal with this tragedy. I mean, this kind of takes us a different way. We don't think of this when we think about the death of Christ. We don't think about how his mother thought or how Mary Magdalene thought or anybody else. I mean, the anguish that those people dealt with, the loss that they dealt with. But then you look at this face. About the next one. I mean, you see it. I mean, here's somebody who's suddenly realized that there is a death, a permanent death that's taking place. As far as she knows, she's not aware of what's going to happen in 3 days. This is all she knows. And you start to see the price other people are paying here. The fact, what it's cost them. The anguish, the fear, the hurt that these people are going through. Let's go to the next one. Here you could look at the way her hands are. Maybe it's just a matter of denial. I can't believe this. This isn't possible. And we talk about doubting Thomas. I mean, here, this is Mary of Cleophas or something like that. She's a friend. Just basically, the idea that she, that the idea of her arms being up that way, this can't be, this cannot be, this did not happen. And so we start to see, another reaction of somebody who's dealing with that reality all of a sudden. That pain, that suffering, that loss. Let's go to the next one. Let's hear them. Okay, let's go to the next. What is there another? Yeah, I think this is Mary. Yeah, this is the Virgin Mary here. So here's his mother, and just think about it. This is truly what a mother. This is what a mother would feel, to see her son laying in front of her, or on the cross. I mean, most of the time when we see these images, everybody's very passive. It's dealing more with the triumphal idea. But yet, in reality, this is probably what happened. I mean, just a gut-wrenching pain that these people were going through to see this happen. What else is there? Okay, there's just another shot of her. You can just see the expression in her posture. You can see her start to collapse. You can see her head dropping. You can just the total anguish, the total loss that's taking place here. The price that's really been paid, in a sense. We can feel it here. You can feel that loss, that price that's being paid. I mean, beyond what we think of theologically, the price he paid for our sins, we're seeing here the pain and the price that was paid, in a sense, by these people to see him lost. So next one. So there's the Christ figure here. They've got him. I mean, he's dead. And as far as they know, he's going to be dead forever. So we're seeing that first moment, that first reality right here. In 3 days, that changes. But right now, this is the reality these people are dealing with. This is the pain. This is the anguish. This is the loss. This is the price that these people are feeling. Next one. That's just another view of the same image. We don't have any more, do we? Anybody have any questions right now? Yeah, for the most part they are, as far as I understand. Which is a really good question. You made me think of something else. Yeah, most of them are. In fact, the paintings, that's one interesting thing that I hadn't really thought about until recently, is the fact that when we were in Rome, it sounds terrible, me dropping all these things, but when you go into almost any church, there are paintings and images, statues, there's stuff it's amazing how much stories are being told. But what's most interesting about it is most of them are almost full size. These aren't little paintings stuck on the wall somewhere. When you walk in, you are confronted with almost a life-size painting of an event. Somebody's death or a crucifixion of Christ or of Stephen. I mean, it's just like you're almost there, just like you're standing there looking through a portal, looking through a window, experiencing these very acts taking place. And so it draws you in because you're thinking, it's almost like I'm here. Everything's full size. It's not some little painting with a gold frame hanging here on a wall that I can go over and look at. I mean, you're confronted. You walk up and there it is. There's life right in front of you. And it was something I hadn't fully appreciated because most of the things I'd seen were in little books. You get a little book with a little picture inside, and you think, that's really a nice painting. I wonder what that really looks like. And then you have the opportunity to walk into that church and step up into that area, and there it is. It's not a little picture. It is a full-size presentation of that as it was presented by that person. And you are drawn in. You actually start to understand or experience that event that took place. So, I mean, that's just another part of that. So nice, thank you. Anything else? No, this is exceptional. I didn't even know about this. Again, my daughter. I mean, if it wasn't for her, I don't know where we'd be tonight. But no, I didn't know about this, but I talked to her about it, and she said, you need to look this up. And so, yeah, it's the first time I'd ever seen it. When I saw it, it just blew me away. I just couldn't believe that somebody was able to come in and pull that off that way. Anything else? I'll give you. How many people have actually had an opportunity to be to a cathedral in Europe? 1, 2, 3, a few. So you guys understand the idea of scale. And I don't know how you felt about it, but I mean, to me, it was just kind of an overwhelming thing because basically, it would be like taking our nave and our narthex and stacking 4 of them up to the side of the other, 2 more, and that would be one of those churches. And to stop and think that these people built these things, they did not have electricity, they did not have diesel fuel, they did not have motors, they had pulleys and wedges, and in a matter of about 100 to 200 years, they could build a cathedral of that size and scale that acoustically was almost perfect, that visually had story after story from the Bible. And part of that, I don't know, you may not be aware of this, but for those who don't know it, nobody read back then. Nobody could read. Your priests could read, your monks and your nuns could read, some kings could read, and some other royalty, but for the most part, us, if we lived back then, we'd be illiterate. We couldn't read a thing. Therefore, the only way we'd know anything at all was it had to be a visual. Somebody would have to present it to us. And that's what they did in their stained glass windows, in their sculptures, in their paintings. That's what they did. They gave them those stories. And so when those people came in, they would see Paul here, they would see Peter, they would see Stephen, they would see John, they would see these people, Mary, they'd see all these people up there in various poses, conveying a different part of the story. And so over time, they would learn about the Bible, they would learn about the stories, they would learn about Christ. It would all be a matter of either a priest up here telling the story or somebody else doing reference. But somehow that's how it worked, because they couldn't read a lick. And, like for me, I kind of wonder when you look around, we think about our kids. I mean, how many stories do we have put up through our church that we could convey to our kids? I mean, they get these little paper things on Sunday morning sometimes. But do we actually have images that on any given day they could walk up to and say, Mom, Dad, what's that about? And we'd have the opportunity to tell them what that story is. And that is, yes. Is that a hand or just this? Sure. No, go ahead. There are times that it's not connecting, no, because if you want to connect, you can connect. It's times that, gosh, how do you say this? It may be more a matter of disappointment. The fact that the stories are there, the desire is there on the part of the church, but the disconnect, the disharmony in a sense of what takes place, how they have set things up, that can be distracting. No, it doesn't stop anything, but it can be distracting. Does that help? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, pitfall probably, most obvious would be the idea that I come in and I think the church doesn't meet my standards in terms of the beauty or harmony of whatever, and therefore there can't be a God there because this is a disjointed visual thing. That would be, which is pretty superficial, but I could see where it would come from. It just doesn't meet my standards, but we could say that about people that come in, music doesn't meet my standards. That guy can't sing. I can't go back. Their choir stinks. So I'll find another church with a better choir. Or I'll find a church with a choir that I can sing in because I'm really good and I need to find that church. So, that kind of answer your question there. And in terms of the Catholic Church, yeah, that daughter I keep talking about that keeps referring all these things to me, that's where she is now. Because she likes that. She likes that process, that ritual that takes place, the visuals that take place there almost every Sunday. And I kind of understand it. We went with her, when we were visiting in Seattle, we went to their church. And I understand what she's talking about, sort of. I had some problems with it, but because it became dry, it became just on the other end of things, it became so ritualized that it was obvious that the energy was gone, the love of it was gone, the understanding of the ritual was gone because I've been doing this. I'm 79 years old, I've been doing this since I was 6. I understand it, that's totally in my head, I know exactly what it's doing, but they'd forgotten why they were doing it. And I could see that in some people. And so, it was one of those things that, yeah, it goes both ways, I think. It can enhance, just like here in terms of enhancement. It was about 3 weeks ago, you guys were up front and Matt Main was on the piano. Now, I don't remember what the song was, but Caleb was on guitar. We had 2 guitars, drums, and he was on piano. And there was one song that was being sung. It was going along like good stuff, just like normal. And then all of a sudden, this violin pops in. You guys remember that? Just for what, 20 seconds, he comes in with this violin and just raises everything up. And so, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. You look at it and thinking, what could happen here? What little thing could be added to this to really take this to the next level, to bring this up to where, people really respond. They start to feel it. It just kind of surges up in them. And that was just one of those little moments. And, I think that's where Sensate looks, is they're looking for those. They're saying, what's that other thing? What's that thing that could be added? What's that bit of color? What's that bit of texture? What could we add that would just take this to the next level? You know, that's probably the good thing about Sensates. The fact that they're always looking for that stuff is kind of the irritating part, I'm sure. But it's the thing that takes us there. It takes the routine away. It's not the same Sunday because something was added, some little bit of spice, a sound, a color, a smell. Something was added that took that to the next level. And I think that's where a sensate can have a role within a church. Another question. Sensate, Sensate. Yeah, since you brought it up, I'll just throw it out there. I thought what the guy presented stunk. I really thought it was terrible. Because he took it and kind of turned it into this emotional gobbledygook thing. And that is not, I mean, there may be a few people out there who would deem themselves sensates that would feel that way, but for the most part, I don't think we are. I mean, yes. Well, you're kind of doing it now. I mean, just the very fact that we're talking about it and consider this a legitimate part of worship is doing that. And you know, there's things we could do around here. Well, I mean, when we start doing it, that will be being part of that. I mean, just like we have music, we've had music in the church forever. At which point, you know, that's one of the things you could do. You can get into the choir, you can sing solos if Caleb will let you do that. You know, but you know, but it's the tradition. It's always been that way. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. In fact, just along that same line, this is an interesting thing. I've got a friend that goes to a church in Southern Illinois, and this is more of a charismatic type church. She had talked about it, but I hadn't seen anything. So last night I talked to her, and I looked it up online to see what was really going on there, and it's a pretty charismatic bunch. But what was interesting about it, they did not have a choir. The pastor would stand up and say, does anybody want to come up and sing in the choir on this next song? And they had 15 people get up out of the congregation and walk up front and sing along with whoever was playing the music up there. Their sound system stunk. It was horrible. All you could do was hear the guitar and the pastor, and that was it. Everybody else was gone. I mean, you could see them. You knew they were singing, but there was nothing there, which was a problem that needed to be worked out by a sensate. But you know, the idea was that, you know, they're encouraging people to just interact on just a spontaneous basis to get up and sing. You know, when the song was done, they went down, sat back down, and they went back at it again. And so, I mean, as we start to introduce the idea of visuals back into the church, as we start to introduce this idea of creating a beautiful place, an awesome place, a holy place, I think, you know, that's, you're inviting kids, and you're inviting people from the outside to come in and participate at that point, because then they've got a place. Because right now there's not. I mean, my place, I've been here all my life, my place was, they'd have a some event going on for a month or so, and they say, hey, can you paint us some posters? Okay. So we paint some posters and hang them up front, and that was my job. And that was it. Beyond that, stay back out of the way. At least that's how I felt about it. So, there was never that encouraging to stay involved. It was always, we need that done, do it, and then go over there and set it. And that needs to change to where those people become participants and you understand them for their worth, just like all these various categories, which are weird, but that's okay.
I think what you say, too, talking about worship, a lot of that worship is in the creation of art.
Yeah.
It's not the, it's the sculpting of that, the composing of the music, the writing of the whatever, so on. The worship comes within the creation.
Yeah. And it's also a way to probably bring some people who are marginal in. Just like, if you go back, say, to the Renaissance period, where you have, you guys have heard of Michelangelo, you've heard of Leonardo da Vinci, you've heard of Caravaggio, possibly, you've heard these names. These people were not devout Christians. They would go to church at times, but for the most part, they were a pretty sketchy bunch. But when it came time for them to create something, their gifts really came out. It's just astounding, some of the stuff these people created. And it's not just that they were well painted or well sculpted. They were doing this. They were creating that hurt, that pain. They knew how to do this. They knew how to organize this thing to get that message across. Even though they weren't front row every Sunday, but they understood the importance of what they were doing and the message that they were trying. Theologically, they were probably a pretty tight bunch. They were probably a pretty good bunch because of what they did create. If you look at these things, these were not piddly little Sunday morning posters that these guys created. This went a lot of thought into them, a lot of understanding the theology of the situation. They knew what they were talking about. And it may have been the only thing that kept some of them even near the church. So it's not like it has to be the guy that goes to the altar every Sunday that is this role. It's maybe some fringe guy out here who has trouble on Saturday night, but he's willing to come in and do some work on Sunday morning, which now we're talking about outreach. We're talking about keeping these people close because you're taking the talents they have and you're using them. Another question. Right. Right. I think there is within the architecture. But I think when it comes to like an individual painting, then there's a niche that needs to be filled, there's a story needs to be told. At which point then they quite often, it was a matter, they would put up, this is what we need 3 or 4 people to come in with proposals and we're gonna pick one. That's how it worked a lot of the time. So, they had the best around coming in, competing to create these things. So, in that regard, so and plus, most of these places took 200-300 years to build, so it's not like anybody's going to be around for very long in terms of the whole thing. So yeah, now they're asking Caravaggio to create this. Well, 15 years later, he's dead. So now we've got to find another person, which they were there. I mean, they were there. And so as you progress through a church, you see styles change somewhat. You see different artists' work being there. But the structure of the church itself is where the cohesiveness is. Because they've got this little niche over here is dedicated to so-and-so. This one is dedicated to so-and-so. The way it's presented is there's harmony all the way through, because they're all the same. But when you get into those individual paintings, that's where it changes. That's where the different person with a little different story comes into the game. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Have you ever studied as to why the person
Didn't get that one.
like to be a top? Was it there? There's a reason why the person why I want him to do that.
That's just the popes. I mean, that's pretty much that they made the decision, or even a small cadre of people would make those decisions. I mean, they had their idea of what they wanted. Sometimes it was, somebody's coming in with money and commissioning something, and they say, okay, fine. I mean, it varied with how things worked. But I mean, I think overall, they had a plan. And I think that plan was passed down as time went along, so they changed too. I mean, just like the Sistine Chapel. I mean, we've all heard of the Sistine Chapel. I mean, it was painted, it was done. Pope comes in and says, it stinks, I don't like it. It all gets torn out, and then they have Michelangelo come in and do it. And while he's doing it, there's people come in, it stinks, I want it changed. Well, they didn't get it changed, but, there were people who didn't like it. It was too gaudy, it was too this, too that, too many naked people. I mean, there was all kinds of reasons they didn't like it. And so, but it lasted, that one lasted. But a lot of them they just been covered up. Because somebody didn't like it, a new guy comes in, he's in power, he's got the money. I want this now, because this guy's well known, I want his painting up on that wall. Which, that's politics, but at the same time, there's still wonderful paintings telling wonderful stories. They're still there, so we can forget the politics and understand that these treasures are still here, that gives us those stories that keep these places being the awesome places that they are. Yes? Oh, go ahead. Yeah. I can remember the first time I saw that. Yeah, it was really a neat thing. As for dance, this is Free Methodist Church. We don't dance here. No, but what's interesting? We sit up here in one of the front two rows. There's dancing all over the place down here, folks. I mean, it's not Watusi or anything like that, but there's a lot of swaying going on down here. You see some foot tapping, and it's going on. So, I mean, it depends on what you want to call dance. But, I mean, responding to the music, yes, it's definitely here. Yes, which can get really vague sometimes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I think, to see if this answers your question, I mean, you're probably aware of the movement. I mean, as we went into mission and prairie, like style of, I mean, churches were created from during that time period as well. For those who don't, it's very plain, very simple. I mean, there's some color, but things are very flat, very simple. But there's a harmony there. There's a repetition there. There's a plan there. So to me, that's fine. I don't think you've got to have all those things necessarily. I mean, no, you don't have to have them. I mean, on the other side of that, though, I do have a problem with a church that is basically created as a large gymnasium, that on Sunday they worship there and then they play basketball on Monday. I mean, you're just kind of thinking, I mean, just how difficult that must be for a guy to sit there knowing he just played basketball underneath, right there yesterday, and there's the preacher's up there now. Yeah, to me, yes, that's true. Yeah, I do feel that way, because when this whole thing started, I thought about the fact that when I was a kid, if we ran up there, we got nailed. That was a sacred place. You do not go up there and horse around. That's God's place. That's where the message comes from. You do not horse around, and now it's changed. But when I was a kid, you did not go up there. So yeah, did that answer your question? Okay. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you brought that up. I'm sorry. I think the first screen we had dropped in front of the Good Shepherd, didn't it? Which I found really irritating. Huh? Yeah, but when we used it, we'd drop right down and just it'd gone, which I thought was so weird because there was plenty of room up there, and yet, because of function or whatever, or ease, it was easier just to drop it down over and let's just keep him out of it right now. He's not part of this, so kind of a thing. Yeah, he'll be back. But going back to your idea of grace, though, I mean, probably one of the good things about this is the fact that we start to understand that, people do have different gifts, at which point means they have different priorities. But at the same time, that's a two-way street. I give to you, but you give back to me. And hopefully from those, things get better. I mean, this takes me another place. After they asked me to do this, I read the thing about Sensate, and I thought, this stinks. This is horrible. This makes absolutely no sense at all. So I went and looked up where the term came from. And it came from a sociologist back in about 1930, a guy named Sorokin. Russian, came to the United States and started dealing with sociology in this country. And what that dealt with was what he created was this idea that there is sensate on this end, which is the idea of somebody who their reality only exists based on what they can sense. If I can't touch it, if I can't see it, if I can't smell it, if I can't taste it, it does not exist. Now, nobody lives that way. There is nobody, but that was that end of it. On this other end were what they call ideationists, which is the idea that this does not exist. The only true reality is spiritual. The idea is to get rid of this, no longer feel hunger, no longer feel cold, no longer, and just live at that higher level. That's the other extreme. Nobody's there either, or not for very long. He talked about the ideal was where you take those two and you bring them together in the middle, where by combining that sensate and the ideationist, you create what he called an idealist, the person who has a balance between the senses and between the spiritual. And he talked about, like, he gave examples like the Greeks kind of met that for a short period of time. They were able to combine those two and create balance between spiritual and physical, materialistic things. And it was the golden age of the Greeks. The Gothic period was another that they talk about. It's kind of the same idea where they were able to take the theology and the idea of the material parts and combine those. And so you have all this music and the churches and all this theology that was worked up during that short time period as well. And they said basically, and each one degrades, and you move to another one degrades, you move to another. And basically he says we're at the end of one that's very materialistic. Is where we are now, and we're in a position, and soon, he says, which was 100 years ago, so he wasn't very good about that one, where we'll be moving to another with more emphasis on the spiritual. Because that materialistic can just last so long. It can become nihilistic. I mean, it's just all a matter of me, me, me. Now, we're not seeing that right now. Kidding. But he says we'll move that way. We'll move. We'll swing. It's a pendulum. We're swinging. When that pendulum hits the middle, that's when we flourish with those two things in balance. And then we swing. And then we come back and we flourish. And which can take, I guess, centuries the way it looks. But so it's the idea of, there is a balance. There is an understanding that you have to have both for the best. Okay? Anything else? I guess. I think. What you mean with? Oh, you mean like a Mary, Virgin Mary that somebody would have? I don't know why not. I mean, we don't go along with that idea here necessarily, but I mean, geez, on around Christmas, how many of us have, manger scenes and all that stuff in our homes? Angels. I mean, we do it, we just don't do what they do. So, does that help answer? Okay. And maybe we should have more. I mean, I know Caleb's talking about Christmas, getting more of those involved in our church services around Christmas, which you guys know what those are? Christmas. It's just symbols that relate to Christianity. You got, most of these things, I guess, actually would be Christmas. If they were done up the right way, and would hang on a tree, they would be Christmas. The cross is a Christmas. A lamb is a Christmas. In terms of how they relate to the Christmas story, birth of Christ. So I mean, there's a lot of things we could do, and not just in terms of putting things up, but just adding. I mean, like when we were talking about this, I thought we have the hanging of the greens, and people like it. I mean, this is something we fill this place up for that, and there's no food involved. But think about this. We've got greenery hanging everywhere, and how much of it do we smell? It's sterile. I mean, it looks nice, but it's sterile, because the thing we understand about greenery and those naturalists that are in the room, you know what I'm talking about, it's not there. So what happens if we come in and do a little spritzing hang a few of those little older Christmas trees around. What?
Changes the game.
Huh?
Changes the whole game.
Yeah, it does. But it does change the game. Because just like Adam was saying, you walk out in the fall, you smell moldy leaves. If you're lucky, you smell somebody burning some of those moldy leaves. But then we talk about greenery, but it's sterile. There's no smell. There's nothing there that gets us really into the idea of what that stuff is. And how many other opportunities do we have that way that we just don't stop and think about, where we could broaden our senses and make something more than it is? Take it up to that next level. Anything else? We're done. He just got up. We're done.
Hey, let's give Terry a hand. So I feel like things are clicking. Great job, Sharon.
Good,
But I don't know about you, but this gets me really excited for heaven. Because I feel like what we're expressing in our time together is bits and pieces of what it means to be made in the image of God. We're made in the image of God, who is a creator, and we have creative people and creators that are part of our congregation. And it's like, all right, typically I think what the church does is we separate what we are calling, and by the way, the book was okay, so, you don't, yeah.
You're being nice.
Yeah. It was okay. I got really excited about the idea,
Yeah.
the ideas that were found in the book.
Good idea.
And, but I think what happens is we typically set up denominations based on maybe one or two of these pathways overlapping. We're like, okay, enthusiasts, let's just make them all Pentecostals. If you're a sensate, you just go to a liturgical church, right? If you're an activist, well, you're just going to be part of one of those liberal congregations that are just always doing crazy things on the street, right? I mean, we kind of have little camps, but I think heaven is going to now activism. I don't know what an activist does in heaven. That'd be an interesting question. But I think what we're going to do is we're all going to learn for eternity how to worship with people that are still different than us, but make heaven this beautiful reality of worship. And I'm not trying to pump any tribalism here, but I think as Free Methodists, we're in a pretty good space to provide place for all of these spiritual temperaments. What if we just dug our heels and said, we're going to give grace upon grace upon grace upon grace upon grace in the context of worship and church life, to see a fuller expression of worship to be released in our body, where people aren't shamed for how they worship or how God wired them, but they feel released to do that. Isn't that beautiful? Man. Yeah. All right. Great work.
Well, thank you.
Anything else? Any other questions for Terry? I didn't want to cut him off. Next week, Pastor Scott's sharing on caregiving. Yeah. So that's going to be great. It's going to be great. It's one of the best caregivers I know. And so we're gonna be having a great time together. 2 more weeks of this. And but thank you so much for coming. Let's have a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you. We thank you that we could be together tonight. How good it is. How good it is to be, Lord, together in the bonds of love. And your word tells us that when we live together in unity, that it's more precious to you than the anointing oil going down the beard of Aaron. That it is just a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful scent and sight. That God, when we're together, that, and when we're, Lord, worshiping you as you've designed us to, that it is a pleasing smell before the throne of God. Lord, we thank you that we can be together, and I pray that you would give us grace to share with each other and give us insight on how we can not only celebrate how you made us, but how you've made other people. Help us to celebrate that too. Thank you for Terry. Bless him, Lord. Give us guidance. We pray that you would raise up artisans, young and old, who can point to the cross. We love you. It's in your mighty and powerful name we pray, Jesus. And all of God's people said together. Hey, will you sing with me the doxology? Praise God from whom all